2017. This is the Bailu Hall, as Zhou Yun just explained. A little egret, the bird of Xiamen City. This is the place where Chinese President Xi is about to meet heads of state from other BRIC nations. This is President Michel Temer. And Mr. Temer also has a state visit this time around to China. Before he landed in Xiamen, he was in Beijing for the state visit. He was followed by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is a handshake a lot of people expected, because there are some uncertainties before the summit, whether or not China and India can smooth over the disputes in the border.
南非总统祖马
South African President Jacob Zuma. South Africa will play host to the next BRICS summit after Xiamen.
俄罗斯总统普京
And Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's no stranger to China. He and President Xi have met many times during their tenures, and they have consolidated their partnership, both personal friendship and the partnership between the two nations. And then the five heads of state and government will have a photo taken in front of the flags of their own nations, and also the BRICS as an institution. And they're holding their hands in front of the flags and also the backdrop of the BRICS Xiamen Summit. This is a show of solidarity and collective vision for the BRICS as an institution going forward as emerging economies. An overview of the city of Xiamen, the convention center by the seaside. This is the venue for the 2017 BRICS Summit. And very soon, there's going to be an opening of the BRICS Summit in Xiamen, and President Xi will give a keynote speech at that opening. We will carry that live. What do you think is the most important agenda for the 2017 BRICS Summit this time, Mr. Wang?
I think the economy of the BRICS nations, some of them still recovering from this, of course, world energy and commodity low situation, and secondly, I think now, particularly, we're going to on the global governance side, we need really a solidarity for that, and finally, I think it's important that those five nations, we should now set a good examples of promoting the globalization and also solidarity for the other BRICS plus nations too.
But on the bright side, it seems the commodity prices have seen some recovery. So Brazil should have seen some rays of hope.
Absolutely. Brazil, as you know, surpassed the United States as the largest exporter of soybeans to China 3 years ago. And with the raise of the commodity prices, certainly Brazil's economy wants, President Temer has also promoting some very important changes in the labor laws, and he wants to improve the fiscal regulations and the social security system in Brazil. All this will simplify and strengthen the country. And once this political crisis is finished, Brazil is really ready to take off again.
And do we see we are at the end of the tunnel? Because it seems that the world economy has seen some good signs of recovery, both advanced and emerging economies.
I think so. I think that the world economy is recovering, and those emerging nations are doing relatively well. I mean, compared with the last 2 years. So I think this BRICS summit, on the other hand, is going to really put some concrete measures. A lot of consensus reached in the past. How do we put it into action? How do we consolidate the financing? the collaboration, e-commerce, cross-border, e-commerce, and also trade issues with this anti-globalization, anti-free trade, new rhetoric by other nations.
I want to pin you down on
Yeah.
e-commerce.
Yes.
Why electronic commerce across the border has caught so much attention, and what it can help to facilitate trade in any way, especially for emerging economies?
It's absolutely so important now because, for example, China has also developed quite a strong capacity on e-commerce, on
Yeah.
e-payment.
China obviously is a leader in this.
Of course, and the challenge of that is, of course, WTO or other new trade mechanism, regional trade mechanism. There's not much talked about, or there's no existed mechanism on this newly emerging economic form that we
Especially
need
internationally.
yeah. How to simplify the customers, how to go through the customer, what's the e-payment through online, what's the purchase online and cross-border trade on the e-commerce. And all those need some new kind of models, new kind of mechanism, new kind of practice. And particularly the government needs to start first bilaterally, trilaterally, and then of course multilaterally. And BRICS would be a good example to start that.
But are all the BRIC countries on the same page on electronic commerce?
Well, I
Charles?
think that China is, again, it's most developed in the e-commerce, and
Yeah.
Brazil is China's.
Because of its large population and very sound communication network system.
and the paying, electronic paying system. Now, Brazil is the largest customer for e-commerce from China. Brazil imports.
What do you mean by that? Best
Brazil
customer.
imports billions of dollars of products through AliExpress and other e-commerce websites. So, in fact, the president of the Brazilian Postal Service has told me that, a large portion of his business is becoming delivering of products imported from China to the e-commerce. So I think that this forum or this BRICS session could be a very good opportunity for the leaders to simplify and establish regulations and rules that can simplify the e-commerce between these countries. That is very important. And if we are able to achieve this, then we will see further growth in the e-commerce between these nations.
What are the obstacles keeping it from developing faster? Because different countries have different laws, different customs, different procedures.
Absolutely, different customs, duties, procedures, and etc. And if we can simplify all this and unify the 5 countries, then we will see a much further growth in the e-trade and the e-payments between the 5 countries.
We're probably
And
going to
that-
see
yeah.
explosive growth because you mentioned that those BRICS nations have very populous countries, has a large population,
Yeah.
and that's a good base for e-commerce.
Yeah, India, South
That's right.
Africa.
But now, if we do not solve the cross-border issues, we do not solve those logistic issues, if there's no regulations, new rules, or new mechanisms to do that, then they will slow it down. So it's important to set up this 5 nations or even more kind of e-commerce protocol or agreement or simplified procedures of, for example, going clear the customer. If I want to order something from Brazil or order something from Russia, can I do it online in China or vice versa? And how they go through the customers without paying heavy duties or simplify that logistic-wise. So if that actually floodgate is open, then we will see another wave of growth of trade and also massive consumption.
It will be another leveler and equalizer for many traders and customers.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Charles and Mr. Wang. And to gain a better understanding and appreciation of these 5 countries, the BRIC countries, we present viewers with our special series that is Fun with BRICS. You'll find out some of the more fascinating facts about the member countries, and we'll be given a closer look at what people's lives are like. Well, this is a special coverage of the BRICS opening in Xiamen. Just now, President Xi has welcomed all the other four heads of state from the BRIC nations, and they will have an opening of the BRIC summit in Xiamen this year. But yesterday, they have a business forum.
Yes, indeed. The business forum has opened yesterday, and President Xi Jinping has made a keynote speech. We'll give you, our audience, more details on all those. Well, as we mentioned just now, this year's BRICS Business Forum has opened, providing opportunities for greater economic collaboration between the five emerging economies. President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech at the opening ceremony, reviewing progress made by the BRICS nations and looking to the future. Our reporter Han Peng has more details on this.
The largest ever gathering in BRICS history. More than 1,200 business representatives from 25 countries at this year's BRICS Business Forum in the southeastern Chinese city of Xiamen. President Xi Jinping gave a keynote address reviewing the achievements of the past decade.
We five nations come together with the same wish in pursuing peace and development and have become the new highlight of the global economy during the past 10 years. In the 10 years, the five countries' GDP has grown 179%, with a 94% increase in the total trade volume, which has made extraordinary contributions to the stabilization and revival of the world economy.
President Xi says the BRICS cooperation has become a positive energy for the international community. Opposition against trade protectionism and increasing the say of developing countries in the global economic governance are important issues of this year's summit. This comes as some people question that the BRICS is now losing its influence.
Seeing ups and downs in its growth, some made the judgment that the BRICS economy is fading. Of course, due to the complexity of both the internal and external environment, the development of the BRICS countries is facing different pressures, but the trend and potentials of moving forward remain unchanged. We're fully confident of this.
On the following day, representatives will discuss issues such as facilitating trade and investment and strengthening BRICS financial cooperation and development. Topics include enhancing connectivity as well as cooperation in the maritime sector, from transportation to energy cultivation and shipbuilding. Han Peng, CGTN, Xiamen.
Chinese President Xi Jinping met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin at the BRICS Business Forum in Xiamen on Sunday. The two leaders called for joint efforts to promote world peace and development. They agreed to stick to the goal of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula after the DPRK's latest test. And they also agreed to maintain close coordination to deal with any further development on the DPRK nuclear issue. Putin said Russia is willing to enhance cooperation with China in investment, energy, agriculture, infrastructure and aerospace. And after the meeting, the two presidents visited an exhibition on China's cultural heritage in Xiamen. Now, for more on President Xi Jinping and President Putin's discussion on the DPRK nuclear issue, let's go to our correspondent, Jim Spellman, who is now standing by in Xiamen. Hello there. Jim, well, China and Russia has consolidated their political trust. What role could their cooperation play in easing tensions on the regional problems, such as the Korean Peninsula issue?
Right. So as you mentioned, President Xi and President Putin agreeing to work towards an appropriate resolution of this, committing to denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. In the past, both Russia and China have backed a plan where the United States would pull back and stop doing all these provocative military tests in the region, and the DPRK would stop its nuclear and missile testing. That would give both sides a chance for the situation to ease and for both sides to come to the table towards negotiations. It's really difficult, though, to see that happening in the short term. The ROK has already begun live fire exercises as a signal to Pyongyang. And in the United States, the U.S. military says that military action is still on the table. But the Chinese and Russian positions are clear. They're pushing for a calm, peaceful resolution instead of conflict. Back to you.
Well, Jim, a BRICS summit is never limited to economic issues. How could the gathering of the five nations, the five emerging economies, which as an entity is having more say in the world matters, how could they affect the global issues?
Sure. Well, I think that the BRICS is really presenting an alternative model for how countries can deal with each other. In a speech yesterday, President Xi said that we're past the era where strong countries prey on the weak, and we're now entering an era where there can be cooperation and mutual respect between all countries. And a big part of that is trade. The more that countries rely on each other for trade, the more they have, the more incentive they have to find peaceful resolutions to disputes such as this. It's quite a different vision than we're hearing from the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump tweeting that he would potentially cut off U.S. trade with any country who has trade with the DPRK. People here reacting, saying that's simply ridiculous, that you could cut off trade with a country such as China. So you're really seeing a different vision. The BRICS vision of calm, peaceful resolution based on common interest, and what at least is outwardly a U.S. approach, which is more conflict. And even as the U.S. is contemplating potential military actions, the U.S. Treasury Department drafting more strict bilateral sanctions against the DPRK, both of those potentials likely to increase the tensions rather than create an environment where both sides can come together and try to negotiate their differences. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Jim Spelman reporting from Xiamen. Now, South Korea has strongly condemned the DPRK for the nuclear test. Speaking at a National Security Council meeting, President Moon Jae-in accused the DPRK of committing an absurd strategic mistake and promised Seoul would respond with the most powerful punitive measures.
We're very disappointed and upset. The DPRK's repeated provocations, including ICBM launches and nuclear testing, heightens tensions not only on the Korean Peninsula, but also greatly threatens world peace. The DPRK has committed an absurd strategic mistake that further isolates the country from the international community. In response to the DPRK's provocation, our government, along with the international community, will devise powerful punitive measures against the North, and we will make the DPRK have no option other than giving up its nuclear and missile programs.
Well, the international reaction has been pouring in response to the DPRK's nuclear test. CGTN's Toby Muse has that story.
Mr. President, will you attack North Korea?
The US reacted angrily to the DPRK's largest nuclear test, threatening tougher sanctions and warning that any threat will be met with a massive response. US President Donald Trump met with his top national security advisors at the White House Sunday afternoon.
We have many military options, and the president wanted to be briefed on each one of them. We are not looking to the total annihilation of a country.
Earlier, President Trump lashed out at other countries on Twitter. Of US ally Republic of Korea, Trump said, their talk of appeasement with North Korea will not work. He also tweeted that DPRK had become an embarrassment to China, which is trying to help but with little success. In a television interview Sunday with Fox News, Trump's Treasury Secretary suggested tougher sanctions could be on the way, potentially targeting those who trade with the DPRK.
We've already started with sanctions against North Korea, but I am going to draft a sanctions package to send to the president for his strong consideration that anybody that wants to do trade or business with them would be prevented from doing trade or business with us.
How likely is that? It's unclear, but with China, the DPRK's principal trade partner, it certainly would not bode well for US-China trade ties. Beyond the US, other countries sought to present a united front condemning the test.
Together with the international community, including the United States, the ROK, China, and Russia, Japan will take determined actions against the DPRK.
China's foreign ministry released a statement saying, "We will work unwaveringly to denuclearize the Korean peninsula and unswervingly maintain peace and stability there." The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres added to the international chorus, condemning the nuclear test, calling it yet another serious breach of the country's international obligations. All this will be under discussion Monday morning in New York City as members of the UN Security Council meet in emergency session to discuss the DPRK. Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
To other global news, the United Nations Refugee Agency says about 73,000 Rohingya refugees have fled Myanmar after violent clashes with police last week. The government is urging people in the country's troubled northwest Rakhine state to cooperate with security forces as they search for insurgents. Coordinated attacks on government security posts and the violent army crackdown have led to the worst humanitarian crisis to hit Myanmar's Rohingya community in decades. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has emerged as a clear winner of a television debate ahead of general elections later this month. During Sunday's 97-minute debate, Merkel came under attack from her Social Democrat rival Martin Schulz on refugee policy, relations with Turkey, and also her handling of U.S. President Donald Trump. The 61-year-old Schulz outfoxed Merkel on ties with Turkey. He bounced her into beefing up her rhetoric by vowing to stop Ankara's bid to join the European Union if he was elected Chancellor. And a poll by Infratest DMAP shows some 55% of respondents believed that Merkel was more convincing, against 35% for Schulz. And the duel was broadcast by 4 German TV stations. It was expected that up to 20 million viewers could watch it. Now let's turn to the Middle East. Syria's army and its allies have advanced toward ISIL-besieged Deir ez-Zor after capturing the Al Karata oil field on Sunday. This year, Syrian President has focused on striking eastwards to reclaim Deir ez-Zor from the ISIL armed forces. Intense fighting is taking place as the army attempts to break through the Islamic State lines to join up with the besieged garrison. And the governor of Deir ez-Zor says the Syrian army will reach the city within 48 hours. And the months of a drought and the searing heat is devastating Italy's agricultural industry. The Italian farm lobby estimates more than €2 billion has been lost nationwide. The CGTN's Kate Parkinson is in Sicily.
You don't have to look very far around here to see the effects of the drought. Just look at the ground. It is completely parched, and this field is covered in huge cracks. The last time they had a day of rain in this part of central Sicily was on the 8th of March. This sheep farm has been passed down through 4 generations. Philippa Camper was born here. She's been farming all her life and says she has never experienced a summer like this.
Questa situazione è difficile perché
it is very hard because, to start with, our milk production has gone down. We've also had to supplement the animals' food, so we've had higher costs because we needed to buy extra food and everything that's needed to keep them healthy. Then we've had to provide water for them. So this is also a new cost because we have to use the tractor, electricity and our own time to bring the water up to the pastures.
Nearly 2/3 of farmland in Italy has been hit by drought, threatening crops like wheat, olives and almonds. The farmers' lobby group says losses could hit €2 billion and that farmers are bracing themselves for a decrease in production of up to 40%. And it's not just farmers who are feeling the heat. Up in Rome, it's hardly rained for months. And as people start heading back from their summer holidays and water consumption is going up, the city's water company has decided it's time to start rationing. During September, at night time, water supplies will be reduced or cut off completely. Kate Parkinson, CGTN, Sicily.
At least 13 toxic waste sites in Texas have been flooded or damaged by Hurricane Harvey, and the impact of flooding on the sites is still unknown. The 13 affected sites contain industrial waste from petrochemical companies, acids, solvents and pesticides. And in the Houston area, authorities say it will take 10 to 15 days for floodwaters to recede. Meanwhile, mandatory evacuations and the spiking gas prices have hit the area. CGTN's Sean Calebs reports.
Houston, Texas is a long way from returning to normal.
It's going to take time, a lot of time for the city to recover from this.
Rising floodwaters badly hit the area's economic linchpin, the oil and gas industries. Many oil refineries in southeast Texas are underwater. including the nation's largest refinery in the town of Port Arthur. As a result, we're seeing some gasoline shortages. This after the price of gas immediately spiked right after the killer hurricane.
I'm sure it affects some people more than others, but yeah, the last thing you want to do is pay more for gas.
In our subdivision, there was, they didn't have any gas, but when we went outside like Costco, they had gas. We had no problems, and there was no long lines.
I think all things considered, I'm surprised gas hasn't gone over $3.
In many parts of Houston and the surrounding area, the cleanup is underway in earnest. But as you can see, many roads remain flooded. And the fact that many refineries simply aren't producing right now, that has upset the equation of supply and demand, adversely affecting gas prices, which will be felt for some time around the United States.
This area of Houston remains under a mandatory evacuation order. Not good news for John Marshall, who lives here. Marshall is a retired executive in the oil and gas industry and someone who understands fluctuating gas prices better than most.
Refineries are shut in. They're shut in because of the weather. They're shut in because they're damaged. And prices are also impacted by the logistical impact of trying to get the fuel that's available out to the public.
A jump in gas prices is understandable given the scope of the devastation. But many in this region are furious, coming across incidents of price gouging, greedy businesses preying on people caught in a miserable situation. People are sharing stories on social media. Here, someone charged a whopping $9.99 per gallon of gas, almost 4 times the national average. Another sign advertising gas for nearly $10 a gallon. Damage from Harvey could exceed $180 billion, according to the Texas governor. Much of that is understandable, but the last thing tired, frustrated residents want is an unfair punch at the pump. Sean Caleb's, CGTN, Houston, Texas.
Well, that's about it for the news at this hour. Well, stay tuned for our special coverage of the BRICS summit in Xiamen in northeast part of China, coming right after this news bulletin at 10:30 a.m.